What's up, guys? We will continue reviewing the plant tissues. But before we continue, I want to explain something that is going to be very relevant in this chapter. Now, this thing is called cross-section. Now, the cross-section is when we want to prepare a tissue in order to visualize it under the microscope. So we have, the cross-section is basically cutting through the tissue, okay? So we cut the tissue. But the cross-section specifically refers to when we cut the tissue perpendicular to its length, like slicing straight across a tube or structure. For example, if you take a blood vessel and cut it like slicing a sausage, for example, you will get a circular cross-section so that we can see its lumen and we will see the wall layers around it. Now, why is this important? Why am I mentioning this? Because when we cut it, whether if we're cutting it through a cross-section or a longitudinal section, the cell shape and the nuclei shape can actually differ depending on the way we cut this tissue. For example, if I take some certain cell or some certain tissue and we cut it through a cross-section, meaning perpendicular to its length, we might see a cell looking round, oval, or polygonal, and we're probably going to see the lumen if we have a tubular structure. But this same cell or this same structure, if we cut it longitudinally, meaning along its length, we're probably going to see different structure. We're going to see probably elongated cell or a spindle-shaped cell or a column-like cell, okay? And even the nuclei can differ depending on the way we're going to cut this tissue. Now, again, why is this important and why am I mentioning this here? Because they are going to mention that some certain cells are going to look like a certain shape depending on the cross-section. So they will mention, oh, this cell looks like this when cut through a cross-section. So this is important because this shape looks like this because we cut it through a cross-section, not because it looks like this. All right? You get it? Now, we'll continue through the meristematic tissue. Now, the meristematic tissue, as we mentioned earlier, is the type of tissue whose cells are characterized by their ability to divide continuously. So the meristematic tissue are actually extremely similar to the stem cells in animals. So the stem cells are undifferentiated cells that can differentiate into any type of cell in the future. Now, this is the meristematic tissue in plants. That's pretty much the same function here. They are undifferentiated and they can differentiate later. Okay, so they will elongate the plant. They're responsible for the growth of the plant, etc. Okay, so this is how you think about the meristematic tissue. The meristematic tissue are the cells that going to divide. They're continuously dividing. And this tissue is found in parts of the plant where cell division and growth actively takes place. All right? So it leads to what? Of course, they're going to lead to the growth, meaning what? So it's going to be elongation of the roots. Of course, when the plants want to grow, they will elongate and they will get taller. That's normal. So elongation of the roots and stems, apices. Of course, the buds are going to grow, so bud growth and the thickening of certain roots and stems. Generally speaking, meristematic tissue does not cease functioning, okay? So they don't cease functioning, although its activity may stop in certain parts of the plant. Okay, so they may stop in certain parts, but like in other parts, they continue functioning. Meristematic tissue is represented by three types of tissues, as I said earlier. So we have apical meristematic tissue. Now, the word apical refers to the apex, meaning the top. And then lateral meristematic tissue, the word lateral refers to the sides. Okay, so the sides of the plant. And then we have the intercalary meristematic tissue. Now, the word intercalary means between stuff. So interpolated, something like this. Okay, between two things. And we actually look at the locations it's pretty much the same, all right? So it's pretty much describing the word that is in the name. So when I say apical, I can think about the apex, the top. So it is found in the apices, or the tips of the roots and stems. And when I talk about the location of the lateral, the side of the meristematic tissue, they're found, they're going to say, okay, they're found in the remote or distant from the growing tips, located on the lateral sides, meaning the sides, okay, the sides of the plant, extending parallel to the outer periderm of the plant body. Now, these parts consist of the vascular cambium and the cork cambium. So the vascular cambium and the cork cambium are actually parts of the lateral meristematic tissue. Now, we can get very important questions here. They will tell you, like, what is the type of tissue for each of the following, and they will tell you the vascular cambium or the cork cambium. And the type of tissue here is the lateral meristematic tissue. All right, so it's not hard. And in the intercalary, as I said, intercalary means between two things. So it is found between what? Between the permanent tissue of the plant and is located far from the growing tips, such as in the internodes of many monocotyledons. Okay? The function of each tissue. So in the apical meristematic tissue, as I said, now the meristematic tissue in general, we said that the meristematic tissue functions in growing, okay, so growth. So in each type of tissue, we're actually going to have some certain type of growth happening. So in the apical, we're going to have growing at the tips or the apices of the roots and stems, and the lateral meristematic tissue function is going to be secondary growth and thickening in plants. For example, the vascular cambium is going to produce the secondary phloem and the xylem, while the cork cambium is going to produce the periderm. Here, we're also going to have extremely important questions telling you who is responsible for each of the following. Who is responsible for the secondary xylem or the secondary phloem? The answer here is going to be the vascular cambium. And who is responsible for the periderm, or what is the origin of the periderm, is the cork cambium. Finally, the function of the intercalary meristematic tissue is going to be elongation at the nodes of the plant and is also responsible for the rapid regrowth of mature leaves. Here we're going to have really important stuff. We're going to have like the secondary, the growth at the tips or apices of the roots. Who's responsible for that? We just mentioned it. We said it's the apical meristematic tissue. Okay? For example, elongation at the nodes. Who's responsible for that? It's the intercalary meristematic tissue. So you will have my PDF, and you will read the questions very carefully. You're going to repeat it. You're going to memorize every word in it, because these are like past questions or like very potential questions. So you need to memorize them very well. The word monocotyledon means that it has only one cotyledon or one seed leaf in its seed. For example, a corn or rice or onion, etc. So the monocotyledon are like flowering plants with one seed leaf, parallel veins, and flower parts in threes. Now let's look at this question very carefully. So they will tell you like what is the type of tissue for each of the following. The vascular cambium. Now the type of tissue in the vascular cambium is the lateral meristematic tissue. The type of tissue in the cork cambium, lateral meristematic tissue. Internodes or nodes, this is very important, is the intercalary. Secondary phloem or secondary xylem is the vascular cambium, which is the lateral meristematic tissue. Periderm, the cork cambium, which is the lateral meristematic tissue. Parts of plants that are remote or distant from the growing tips or growing apices, the lateral meristematic tissue. Parts of the plant that are located on the lateral side of the plant, of course lateral, it's in the name. Parts of the plant that extend parallel to the outer peridium of the plant body, lateral meristematic tissue. This is just in the description. We described it here, so they can ask you like this. For example, they can ask you, what is the type of tissue in parts of the plant that are far from the growing tips or growing apices intercalary, because it's mentioned here. Here. Now, this one here and this one. Now here it says part of the plant that are far from the growing tips or growing apices, and here it says parts of the plant that are far or remote from the growing tips, growing apices. It's the same, describing the same thing. But as I've seen in the previous questions, some questions can be extremely weird that they depend on how they phrase it in the book. So if this is how they phrase it in the book, that means it's the lateral meristematic tissue. And this is going to be the intercalary because this is how they phrase it in the book. Now, if this present in the exam, I would definitely say that there are two acceptable correct answers. But as I'm telling you, I've seen so many weird questions before that this is actually can be a thing. They can give only one correct answer because this is how it's phrased in the book. So again, this is not an opinion. I'm not giving you an opinion here. This is how the book teaches the stuff. All right? Question. Lateral meristematic tissue includes what and what? This is a very important question. It's going to include the vascular cambium and the cord cambium.